Well, welcome to another episode of the Business is Mission podcast. I'm here with another of my old friends. I mean that both literally and literally. I'll give you a quick introduction to Bill Andrews. We've known each other, I want to say 50 some odd years. We met back in the mid 70s when we were living and working on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. Became great friends and had some fun times together. I actually was part of his wedding, and I did not sing for the audience. I did not sing, but we've known each other a long time, and we'll try to avoid going down memory lane today because we've got some important things to talk to. Let me give a quick background on Bill. Bill is a professor at Stetson University. He's the former chair of the Management and International Business School there. He's got an international pedigree that he'll talk to us about today. Based on that, I guess, that position, he's also the co-founder of the Hatter Angel Network, which is an investment network built out of not officially Stetson, but connected to the Stetson community. He has a master's degree from Thunderbird School of Global Management and a PhD in business from the University of Georgia, the Terry School of Business. And those of you who don't know, that's one of the top B schools in the country. And so all of those things, I'll get to what's important. Bill has been married for 45 years to Carol, who is an amazing woman, no doubt. He has 3 daughters, and from them, he told me, he said that we have 4.5 grandkids, which I hope everybody understands. That means there's 4 out and 1 on the way. So with all of that long introduction, Bill, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. Great to see you on the camera.
Well, thanks, Mike. I wish they had this kind of video production and they could have seen the interpretive dance that you did at my wedding. It was really stunning.
It was special. It was really special. Yeah.
Right. So
Bill, give us some background, man. I mean, and for those of you who listen to the podcast regularly, we always do this in an informal and relaxed way. This may be a little more informal and a little more relaxed because Bill and I have known each other for so long, and we really have become, over the years, great friends. He's a wonderful brother in Christ. And so anyway, I gave you the introduction, but you tell us a little bit of your story, Bill.
Yeah, well, back to a little bit of our story first is, I think Mike and I have kind of walked through some of the same peaks and valleys of the life of faith together. And so I think that's been particularly helpful in the relationship that we have. And I do consider him one of my BFFs for life. And so, I think what I'd like to talk about is my journey as someone who really came to Christ in college and really had a sense of wanting to be involved in the spread of the Lord's kingdom, and didn't really know how to do that. And at the time, there was a lot of pressure, and I think this is true of a lot of folks, right, who come to Christ in college. And there's just sort of this assumption, especially if you're a male, that means that if you're really committed, that you're probably going to end up going into some kind of full-time Christian work, right?
Absolutely, man. There's only 2 choices, right? It's not you'll appreciate this, Bill. We named our business Third Path Initiative, right, because of the dilemma that you just outlined. So there is a third path.
So within a couple of years of having really come to a wonderful faith in Christ, I kind of sort of unfortunately ended up with this view of what the spiritual man looked like. And basically he was single, he was on the mission field somewhere, and he'd read George Mueller's biography, so he never had to ask for money.
Every year. You read it annually, by the way.
Yeah. And it would just money would fall from the sky because he had such a good connection. Well, it wasn't long before that, after that I just didn't see a path to the mission field. I got married at age 22, which was one of the best things that happened to me, I might add. I'm not saying I did that too early. We grew together. And I actually had to find out shortly after I got married that I actually had to go to work, and I couldn't just pray and have it fall out of heaven like a roasted goose. And so I think it was Luther who said something to that effect. But anyway, So I really began to, I think because of my gift mix, I really wrestled a lot with whether I should go to seminary and become a full-time Christian worker. And for whatever reason, that didn't really materialize either. And really, I thought I was very much pushed by circumstances to kind of what at the time felt like maybe a compromise, and go to work in the working world. And I went to I originally started out with a couple of sales jobs, and then eventually with a couple of companies that did various kinds of international trading. One in seafoods, mostly to Japan, and another one that was brokering airplane spare parts and services all over the world, since most of the manufacturers are based in the U.S. and we serve a global network of aircraft from the U.S. And so that kind of took up a lot of my time in my 30s, but constantly I was reading, I was studying, I was praying. And then I had the opportunity to go back and get a PhD, which I did, but very much with a very particular sense of why I was doing it. And that was because I wanted to be kind of a pay-your-way campus worker, as opposed to someone who joined, one of the college ministries, went on staff, and then had to raise money. I'm not saying that is something you shouldn't do, but over the years, I've felt that is often it's as unhelpful in the long run as it may seem helpful in the short run. So what I have done since then is I've really been on campus now for more than 30 years. And for about 30 years, I've had a Bible study that meets in my home. And I've been actively involved in my church. And my sense of calling was, there's a lot of really funky doctrines that circulate on campus, even within the Christian community. And a lot of these things either keep us in a spiritual cage as true believers, or actually keep us from actually understanding what true faith in Christ is. So I felt like my calling was to be that guy on campus that would help shepherd both doctrinally and morally the students that I would be able to interface with. And so that's,
Bill,
yeah.
let me jump in here and ask you, because I know you come back to this. We're going to get to a place where we're talking about your recent trip to Ukraine and some of the ways that you were able to share some of this experience just recently.
Right.
But thinking about your role on campus, the students, they see you as a professor.
Right.
They don't see you as a campus minister in that professional sense,
right.
But they see you, because I've been there. I've been there with you. I've been there with your students. I've gotten to know some of them, and they do see you as a mentor, as a pastor to their lives, if not in a building. It's given you an identity, is the word that we've often used among unreached people groups. It's like, who is this guy and why is he here?
Yeah.
So talk about that, because you have a very simple but vital answer to that question that a lot of the people in so-called, and I'm doing air quotes for those who can't see it, the people who are in ministry of some sort, they don't have that. So talk about how you've learned that and developed that over the years.
Right. Well, I think, in terms of philosophy, we get into philosophy of ministry really quickly, but one of them is there's a lot now with the internet and podcasts like this, you can get all kinds of stuff just without ever having to leave the comfort of your chair, right? But I think what's really lacking is both the modeling and having someone see how this person lives. And the second thing is that since most of the teaching is coming that you get sort of from online sources or your pastor or whatever, it comes from professional Christians. It's easy for them to have sort of a professional Christian daily or weekly schedule that they're speaking from, as opposed to the demands and the challenges of working in sort of a daily secularized work. they can't get up in the morning and study the Bible for 4 hours because they got stuff they got to do. And so, how does ministry look when you have a day job? And there's so much discipleship that's done by people who don't have day jobs that it's actually pretty helpful for them to see someone who has a day job, as if you will, and how they think about ministry and discipleship. It's easier for them to relate to, and we just automatically become a model for how they begin to think about it.
Isn't it interesting? First of all, I love the way you're going with that, because when Jesus called disciples, he didn't say enroll in my school. Mm-hmm. He didn't say subscribe to my podcast, right, or even read the book. Yeah. Right. I mean, he just said, follow me, walk with me. Yeah. And it is in the midst of daily living mm-hmm. that his disciples learned of him. So that's a great point you're making. Another thing, as you're talking, it strikes me that this idea of online ministry, and I do it. Right? But I have an editor who's going to take every mistake that Bill and I make on this podcast, and he's going to take it out. So you guys will say, wow, these guys they think fast, they talk fast, they never make mistakes. He doesn't take all of them out. Right. But when you see somebody that is an edited version of reality, you're not actually seeing reality. And so what you're describing to me, Bill, is these guys see you in the good, the bad, the ugly. They see you, the days when you're walking in, quote, victory. They see you the days when you just had a fight with one of your daughters, whatever, right? I mean, they see the real Bill Andrews. Why is that different? And why does that matter so much?
Well, let me answer that with a story. I think, it matters because I think, in today's environment, the whole idea of authenticity is under, Christian authenticity is really under tremendous, it's under the microscope. And the reason is because there's been so many high profile Christians who have, let's just say, not persevered very well. And so let me just sort of give you a particular example. So a number of years ago, I did a sabbatical in Spain with my family, and I taught at a university there. And we were there for about 6 months, and I taught for a semester. And over the course of the semester, I just did my teaching and business stuff. And they, without any sort of, first of all, I bumped into a couple of full-time missionaries, campus workers there from the U.S. And when I first arrived, I asked them, well, tell me what it's like here. What should I expect? How can I be effective? I'd like to try to use my time here to win people for Christ, to be an influence, that kind of a thing. And so they said, well, it's really hard here. We've been here a while and we just get no traction. And I asked them, I said, how do you represent yourself? And they said, well, we represent ourselves as social workers. And I thought, okay. But, I flipped it around. I thought that'd be really, really odd if there were some people that were kind of hanging around my campus that weren't otherwise involved. And we asked them, what are you doing here? And they said, well, we're social workers. Yeah. And, It's like, okay, so are you, so what's the real reason? Are you working for the CIA? Are you drug dealers? That's code for something. Yeah. What is it?
Yeah. What's the truth here? Right.
Yeah. And so, but they basically said it was a really hard country to penetrate. They couldn't get anybody to come to their Bible studies. They're really struggling. And these are folks who'd been trained and who knew the language. And so I said, well, okay, we'll see what happens. So I began to teach my courses. And so by the end of the semester, we finished up, as we were finishing the course, I invited the students, I had about 20 or 25 in my class. I said, I would love to share with you from the Bible about the true meaning of life. It's totally not related to the class. I would like to invite you to my home. And nobody has to come. It doesn't affect your grade, but I would really love to share this important part of me with you. And I'd asked these two missionaries, I said, do you think I'm going to get any traction here? Should I try to do this? And they said, I don't know, you might get one or two. And I said, well, okay, that'll work. I'll start with one or two. And so the short version was every single person except maybe one or two showed up that evening and apologized profusely for the ones who couldn't make it. I said, I'm so sorry, I can't make it. I'd love to do it. And so it was a very simple gospel presentation, and it was a real pin drop moment. They were like, wait, what? How is it we could have missed this? I've been going to the local church for, which is, more of a formalized tradition, if you will. And they taught an ethic. They never taught anything about salvation through Christ. And how is it that we've missed this? And so shortly after that, I left. And I had heard people actually said, it's amazing. After you left, there was an enormous amount of discussion about, what could this mean? How could this be so? How did I miss it? So I wish that I had been more closely aligned with a church while I was there, so I could kind of funnel these people there. So that I certainly didn't do everything right, but the point I want to make is that I had a legitimacy there because I had a day job that my friends and colleagues, if you will, who were had sort of the missionary hat on, struggled to get. And not only that, but I also had if you will, a cultural integrator and a cultural interpreter, if you will, who basically, the person who hired me, they were responsible to make sure that I integrated into the faculty community and these kinds of things. So that was super helpful. And then one other thing is, towards the end of this 6 months there, one of the fellows came up to me and said, so you are a Christian, right? And I said, well, yes, I'm a Christian. And he goes, it's very hard to be a Christian, isn't it? And I said, well, yes, it's impossible. And so, because I knew where his head was. And he said, yes, impossible. He goes, what do you mean by that? And so it was a natural entree into the gospel. And I didn't wear a sticker that says, Jesus loves you or anything like that. But just by little simple things like not womanizing, not using profanity, being gracious and patient with people, just some very basic Christian virtues. Perhaps because the ambient darkness, they saw the light. They said there's something different here. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that I was daily with these people, as you pointed out, gave me a platform that I might not have had otherwise.
So we use the term identity. You use the term legitimacy, mm-hmm. but it means the same thing, right? I mean, mm-hmm. Again, who are you? Why are you here? And in any culture, mm-hmm. If you don't have a real answer to that people can wrap their heads around, that they hear what you say and they say that doesn't smell right, that doesn't sound right, then they're going to assume the worst. We tease about it, but it's really true. But here you went. You were a visiting professor. Mm-hmm. You were endorsed by the university. You use that platform, that I want to say platform, but I almost make it sound fake. You use that legitimacy to open doors and build relationships and ultimately to be able to share Christ. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back because I got a lot more questions for you, Dr. Andrew. Okay, so Bill, I said we'd be back, and I want to ask you, you just told one of my favorite stories that you shared with me the other day about the experience in what you were seeing in Spain. And by the way, I've done work there, and I've done work in South America, and I hope my listeners will understand I'm not taking a shot at Catholic Christianity, but in many historically Catholic countries, there is this ethical view of Christianity, this religious view of Christianity, and very little understanding of the reality of being somebody who is cast entirely on the mercy and grace of God. That's what you just pointed out. Mm-hmm. Your life made them ask questions that gave you the chance to answer it with the gospel of grace, which is a beautiful thing. And people are hungry for that. Their souls thirst for that. So it's a great story. You shared it when we were talking earlier this week. And I was hoping you'd share that. I'm glad you did. So, Bill, talk about, for just a minute, the integrated life, because you don't and you and I, Bill alluded earlier. I'll jump back a second. We both, when we met, we were both connected to a very, what I would call a super spiritual institution. I was a student and graduate. Bill was an adherent, and we we paid a terrible price for that connection. Not so much with each other, but with
But,
this institution, because it was so unreal.
mhm,
With good people, good folks who love the Lord, but
yeah,
they just found themselves unable to see how Christianity and the real world work together. And so
mm,
they lived a kind of hyper separatism that was unhealthy to say the least. Both
yeah,
of us, God has been merciful to us and has led
yeah,
us into not a living of the world, but certainly learning how to live in the world in what I term integration. You may have a different term,
yeah,
but that we don't have a sacred secular dichotomy in our thinking about life and work and ministry. We see it
yeah.
truly as a whole. But talk about how you got there, but more importantly, how that works out in your day to day life and work there at the university.
Yeah. Well, let me go back, and I'm gonna quote you on something I'm sure you've forgotten, but it's one of those things that I
If I
remember.
like it, I'll own it. If I don't like it, I'll just say you're an old man with a bad memory.
No, you'll actually probably love it, and even though you've forgotten it, you'll probably say, "Oh yeah, I remember that." But when we were basically, in your early Christian desire to grow, it's easy to be enamored by someone who you think is super spiritual. And that was the way this group we were in had some folks that were presenting themselves that way. And so they had sort of their own sort of schema for how you become like them. And in this particular, there's all kinds of variants of this out there, but this particular group fell generally into what probably would call pietism. And and I remember once, Mike, you said, we were just struggling with how wretched we felt as Christians or whatever. And you said, you know what our problem is, Bill? Our God lives in the prayer closet. In other words, this particular group really emphasized sort of the internal how you feel about your faith, really to the exclusion of what Paul talks about when he says the goal of our instruction is love from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. And so the question is, on one hand, there's certainly the internal part where we come to really understand and believe in the love that God has for us, and that's, by the way, a lifelong process. I'm delighted to say that I grasp that so much better now than I even did 10 years ago when I'd been
Yeah.
40 years in the faith. And but then it begins to move out into, so how do I express this? And there's the ways to do that are so much broader than just formal, preaching and teaching in the context of the church. Again, those are important things. We highly value them. But you wanted to talk about integration of faith and life.
Yeah. How are you integrating your faith into your daily walk, your daily experience as a
Yeah.
professor at Stetson?
It's really at one level, it's very underwhelming. So you basically try to live by the Sermon on the Mount, if you want to think of it that way. So there's aspects of certainly of personal purity. There's aspects of forgiving others. There's aspects of stepping into the lives of need when you see it. There's aspects of self-sacrifice, not returning evil for evil. It can be very unimpressive. But here's the thought. So I began, and I've taught a lot of stuff both in my churches and that I've attended over the years, and as well as in my own Bible study they have with the students. And at one point, I asked myself, I don't know why we don't just all listen to, pick your favorite guy, R.C. Sproul tapes, whoever your guy is,
Hmm.
Tim Keller, whatever. And 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 it occurred to me that, they may be really good teachers, but we don't know them. We can't see the integrity of their walk. And so for the average believer to be involved both with the witness of their life as well as with the witness of their word, just it's a package that needs to go together. And there's a lot of talk out there now about that's actually floats in either cyberspace or it floats just in books or whatnot. That's really not linked to a character. You know, we don't know. You know, I mean, R.C. Sproul lived right down the road practically from me, 20 miles maybe. And I don't know him personally, but, you know, I've heard stories about him. I don't know. I've met Tim Keller. You know, his sister went to our church, but I never got to know him. And so I think it's just hard to, and this is slow process stuff. You know, it takes a long time for integrity to show. So it's not going to be one of these things where you become rich and famous because of your integrity, right?
In that,
yeah. But it's going to be something that gives weight and gravitas to your words for those people that you're serving.
You know, it's interesting as you're telling that, and you're right. It is underwhelming because it's so simple. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've landed on biblically and in a very practical way is that, you know, when Paul talks about the fact that we have a smell as believers, mm-hmm. we have an aroma. Yeah. He uses the word right, and it's the aroma of Christ. We don't, and he makes it clear when we're out in the world. To some people, that is a stench. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like the smell of death. And mm-hmm. but to others, it's the aroma of life because God is using he's using us or through us. He's drawing people. He's attracting people to himself. Right. And I've always thought, you know, as you're describing that is the essence of we're trying so hard to be integrated. It's like, no. You're already integrated. Just live. And mm-hmm. it goes to what I felt was the best definition of business as mission I've ever heard mm-hmm. from a good friend of mine named Bill Job. He said, it's simply walking with Jesus in business. Yeah. All the other things we wrap around it, right? It's like, yeah, okay, I get it. And the same thing would be Christ in academia. It's just walking with Jesus as a business professor at Stetson or as a teacher in Spain or whatever, because it's the Christ in me, it's the Christ in you that's actually reaching out to people through us. And I mean this in an immediate way. Yeah. No, in an immediate way. Through I said almost as if we're not there. Right. Because he's attracting their heart. Yeah. And we've all had this experience where at some point in time, somebody said, tell me about your life because there's something different. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's not because our life is so attractive. It's because Jesus in us is saying, hey, come to me. We just happen to be the flesh and blood there at the moment. All right. So we're going to have another episode here and we'll have following on talking about a much more mechanical topic, which will be, I hope, exciting for our listeners, which is financing and fundraising and investment in the world of business's mission and impact business and all the rest of it. But I do, before we get away today, Bill, I want to ask you to tell us about your two trips you've taken recent. Well, one's not so recent, but they're connected. Recently, you were in Ukraine, right? And the other time you went on an academic mission to Cuba. And the things that you saw, what you saw, just tell us the story, because I know people love to hear about, wow, this is a professor, great, but what does he really do? Yeah, you go all over the world, and you've got amazing stories.
Well, let me go back to one thing that you said that I just want to emphasize. So here's what my day looks like often. Before I teach, I pray. It's like, Lord, I pray that you would help me to be a good teacher. And I'm not even teaching Bible stuff. I'm teaching strategy or organizational behavior, culture, leadership, venture capital, and that I would have patience with the students. That I would be really good at what I do, not because I hope to win some award, teaching award, not for any other reason, that I simply want to model my Savior well. And that's a very mundane thing, and it's a very mundane. It doesn't appear to have great spiritual impact, but that's part of this authenticity. Christians need to be good at what they do. They don't need to be the best. They may not have the capability to be the best, but they need to strive to be excellent for the sake of doing your work heartily as unto the Lord. So now let me move on to what you just mentioned. So
you guys are already understanding. Bill and I could go forever.
Yeah,
We won't. I promise you, this podcast episode will end and you can get about your business. But Go ahead, Bill, please.
So I'm going to start with the Ukraine. Our church, Christ Community Church in Daytona Beach, sent myself and another one of our members to the Ukraine the last 2 years. And of course, everybody knows what's been happening there. And the international aid agencies, both the NGOs and the formal governmental supporting agencies, they've pretty much now taken care of a lot of both the medical and the food needs. So there's about a third of the Ukrainian country that's now occupied by Russia. And an enormous number of those people have moved either to the free side, the part that still is Ukrainian control. They've moved there, and they've lost everything. They didn't have time, but they couldn't sell their house. They've lost their job, whatever they were doing. And these are not quintessential refugee type people in terms of if you have some notion that there's some sort of uneducated starving person. These are middle class, even just working people, professional level people. All of a sudden they've lost everything, and they are identified as internally displaced people, IDPs in the Ukraine. And so the need that has not been very well addressed is sort of their existential angst. So if you've just lost everything you had, you've lost your job, all of the things that we usually associate with their identities. Yes, you're glad to have food. Yes, you're glad to have a place a shelter and some medicine if you need it. But where does God fit into this? And this is just a really tough question that is eating at a lot of these folks. And so we went over there really in conjunction with a missionary who is from the U.S. and married to a Ukrainian woman. And we were invited to go over there and basically build on the foundation that he and a few other people had laid. There's been a lot of people coming to Christ there. And they, it's almost as it says in Acts, they don't even know if there's a Holy Spirit. I say that tongue in cheek, but the point is they're very uninformed on their brand new faith. Definitely believers, definitely a life change, but really wrestling with a lot of big issues and filtering it through a lot of the post-Soviet atheism that they grew up with, or the Orthodox legalism.
Which isn't gone, by the way. Let's be clear. It's been 40 years, and all of that is still there.
Yeah.
It's deeply embedded in their spirit.
Right. And then there's the Orthodox, either the legalism or the ritualism, and so when the war first broke out and the physical needs were really pressing, the government was slow to respond. The Orthodox Church said, we'd be happy to pray for you, just bring your pocketbook, bring your wallet. And then the Evangelical Church stepped up and actually met the needs. And that opened up a lot of doors. Why do you care for us? And so my friend, Kevin Smith, and his wife were very instrumental in, he has a wonderful gift of evangelism, and he did a great job opening a lot of doors, leading a lot of folks to Christ. But now they have all of the questions, and even more so than perhaps we had when we came to Christ. They've lost loved ones. They've lost their homes. how do we reconcile this with our loving Heavenly Father? And other
Mm.
kinds of questions. How come I still struggle with sin? All of the usual questions that young Christians grow up with. So we had the opportunity to go and to really help fortify them in their new faith. And if you've ever, and Mike, I'm sure you know what this is like. You know how when people walk out of the sanctuary and they say, "Thank you, that was a great sermon, Pastor." You're like, you know,
Wah, wah, wah.
yeah, it's it's like, yeah, right. My head's not going to get too big on that. But you've also noticed when people are just sort of emphatic about, said, "Thank you so much. I so needed what you said. It was life changing." And even with the language barrier, we sensed a lot of that among the people we served. So it was just a real blessing. So that's by the way, the current state of the Ukrainian folks are. When we were there last year, they felt like they were winning the war. They were pushing the Russians back, which they were. And there was hope that things would eventually go their way, and the world was behind them. This year, it's the opposite. The Russians are the ones that are moving into the Ukraine further. They feel like they're losing the war, and they're not certain that the world is behind them anymore. And so, and they've had a whole nother year of personal loss in terms of losing loved ones. So the demeanor, the sort of the temperature, the emotional temperature was much more downbeat this year. And the Christian leaders are exhausted because they have been serving in this capacity, and some of them have been called up into the service, and there's no one to pastor their church, so they pull up the next best guy, and so there's just a lot of need for supporting and training those young men as well.
Oh, and obviously the call to action is pray, but there may be opportunities for some of our listeners to go and to
Yeah.
encourage and serve in some capacity, coming out of even what we're talking about.
Yeah.
All right,
And
so Bill, go ahead.
I was going to say, if there are, have Mike just have them contact you, and you can contact me, and
Yeah,
we can maybe do a conduit.
Yeah, we'll get you there. If you want to get there, we'll find a way to get you there. So,
Yeah.
All right, so talk about Cuba. Now, this is an older story, older
Yeah.
trip, but it's also, to me, it's very appropriate for today. Not just what God's doing overseas, but just thinking about how the church and the people survive in those types of environments.
Yeah, so Cuba is for all of the vibe that it has and the buzz about it being a really cool place. It was, and I've traveled quite a bit in Latin America, Central America. It's one of the poorest places I've ever seen, and and it's, of course, it's because of the policies. The people, it's you really get the sense that it's the people against the state. And again, I'm not even trying to make a political point, but for example, I was driving out from Havana towards Cienfuegos, if that means anything to you, sort of the center of the country. And we saw some people pulled over, and they had their trunk open. And I said, "So what's all that about?" And the guy who was driving us, he said, "Oh, well, probably what happened is they're probably farmers, and they're supposed to be selling their farm products to the government at these super reduced prices, and they're basically driving it to the market to try to get a better price, and that's considered smuggling here, and that's a big deal. So they're in some serious trouble." Mm-hmm. So the way that and this is pretty much the same today. There's a pay scale, and again, I know you're going to be like, I must have it wrong, but I don't. It's the pay scale is like something like from like $10 or $15 a month to $30 or $40 a month for pretty much everybody, no matter what you're doing. And
It's not just necessarily per capita. That may be for a family, right?
Well, no, that's for a worker.
Oh, okay. All right. So it is per capita. All
Yeah.
right.
So you might have two people
Which is
working.
a little better, but not much.
Well, then you're doing big money. You're up to $60 or $80 a month. Okay. And they also get a Staples card, which allows them to buy certain commodities at below market prices: rice, flour, whatever. And then they also have really cheap housing. I think the government owns pretty much all the housing still. And although they do have an arrangement where you can buy it, but you can't sell it except back to the government, and the government controls the price. So that, in effect means that you may have some kind of nominal ownership, but they really own it. So anyway, so I would ask people, how long does your stipend card and your money, your salary last, and your family? And the most I ever heard was 2 weeks. And so the rest of the time, these are the most entrepreneurial people I've ever met. They are scrambling to figure out how to make ends meet. And a lot of it is through various forms of governmental theft. There's actually a famous saying, maybe you've heard it, where they say, let's see, what is it? We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us, something like that. And but it's and another example was, so there was a guy, I took a bicycle taxi from like the Hotel Nacional, which is in one part of Havana, to Old Town, which is, I think, a couple miles. And it was pretty hot. So I'm in this bicycle taxi, and the guy gets pulled over by one of the local, authorities. And it turns out that he had the wrong license. He could only take nationals and couldn't take internationals. Well, somehow I guess I didn't look like an international in Cuba, and so I don't know whether it was the hair or what, but and so he got this pretty large fine. I think it was like $4 or $5, which is, if you're making $30 a month or 20, that's a lot of chunk of money. And they also get put in some kind of blacklisted thing. And if you get more than a couple of these fines, you get in trouble. And the cost of the license was about 25 or 30 times more to have the license to carry internationals, and you have to pay it on a monthly basis forward. So you have to have really good bicycle taxi days to make any money by the end of the month if you follow the rules. So there's just a lot of oppression, and the people are trying to figure out how to work around it. As far as my interactions with the Christians there, I was basically, it was a part of a class, and so we didn't actually get involved with church proper, if you will. Although I did use contacts to locate a believing pastor down there and ask what we could bring, if we could bring him anything. So we did make a special delivery. He said, "Oh, please, if you could just bring me a ream of paper, that would be fantastic."
Now, just to clarify for our listeners, a ream is not a case.
No,
a ream is one of the packages within the case.
Yeah.
And the guy says, "Could you please just send us, bring us a ream of paper?" That's staggering to me. All right, Bill, we're going to stop for today.
Okay.
We could go on forever and ever. Thank you for the day. And Bill is going to be back on a future episode. We're going to be talking about business's mission and investment, impact investing. Bill has this. I'm looking it up here so I get it right. The Hatter Angel Network is one of the areas that he's involved in this, but he's got a lot of experience. This is his job. This is what he does, is teaches and leads business all at the same time. So I'm looking forward to that. Bill, thanks for being with us today. Really fun, as always, to catch up with you, and look forward to seeing you and talking with you soon.
Yeah, likewise, Mike. Thanks for having me on.